My heart's in the Highlands, my heart is not here. My heart's in the Highlands, a-chasing the deer, a-chasing the wild deer, and following the roe. My heart's in the Highlands, wherever I go.
Faclan aintach gadíú, ag gaula rucig an na siarach gynnyrar. My heart's in the Highlands, my heart is not here. Ach hiwsin ymach gyda uig fôr ag Burns rys i Ghàidhealtachd, Ghàidhealtachd agus na Hárainn. Ach na lasan, charo daif bail rys i Ghàidhealtachd gus na san ichyd gyda san faclwnig di fiawl.
Van y geiliau yn ffeicing le moran, mae'r ffwch, cwnardoch, Raibeart mi erabsoch. Mae'r gynnu fa chafwr na'n trael yn y cynni yn ac agos fa riegor. Mae'r ffwch fa ffeimoch i'r Garastan yn yr son yng nghymal ffwsmach. Agos ydy rhaid yn dyrannig na biach yn sy'n gydfa dawn rofddi o'n i charddi. Yn dyrannig at art ma'n awm sy'n agos as y iau.
Chwyddeidyn yn sémasach an am leil na cheallich uanfasydd prostan i Ghàidhealtachd, agus rhi Lyn Burns fa imig na chast bios di chainacydd. Nodd fa Burns y crynach y goren ys fein hémasach, agus a hen ysgrifig bardach gagwalen hyf, fam thawsa Charles Stewart hast bio na ogarach ys rynyorba, agus fan y sior ys ich hast y clisgig rhan y gael y hwgtaichga.
Burns's selection and recreation of Scottish Highland and Jacobite song is a crucial moment in the racial history of Scotland. We have the low moment with the Jacobite rebellion of 1745, where the Highlander becomes particularly despised and feared. Several decades later, we have Robert Burns bringing the Highlander back into the mainstream as a figure to be loved and embraced.
An na seachiad dia céthe fichid sa seach, go Burns da chóirst chun a Ghàidhealtachd.
I wish for nothing more than to make a leisurely pilgrimage through my native country.
Vrosnich yn hwyrus sy'n yn nhw gyfecau an yn ceol is oren na Ghàidhealtachd, agus fiws sémasach.
Lein Robert Burns fa fiarn at yr gawl y sgeil an nalape na sgarich dwy, y hyf canan, economy, politics agus bethe hóisialte. Ach hyn Burns y mach o laf gytw hawl y sgani sin. Y cyfaltia dôlchus y fanna yfyregil is tadde dy chior y sich fdechdyn.
Sio am ddynwy'n ha caracaine a ha conhyrach o bair sy'n fa Burns dy si Ghàidhealtachd. Siad Highland Mary, che y fwynnych dy gwynwy'n agos y fryn eich gaelig, a chai y gopydd y galtram llenw an y machlyn. Fai hen agos Burns rilianlanach agos chan y cwt gyrontoran ysgrifa Will you go to the Indies, my Mary, y sialtyn gyrodwlach y falaf colag gwrwg i Jamaica.
Will ye go to the Indies, my Mary, and leave old Scotia's shore? Will ye go to the Indies, my Mary, across the Atlantic roar?
Fa spéis y hwg Burns dy fod yn y chair y gael, chili gaelig, calag iddach y neu mirwn môr na gawl. Na lasan fan y geilig dditsin gyda'n y gael gynlog, na chrondach lisgyd ydyn dyfialig, y brahag y chrwn.
In the 18th century, the lowland attitude to the Gael, which was some centuries old, was quite often one of hostility. And this became more pronounced after the Jacobite rebellions, when, of course, so many of the lowlanders had been on the side of the British state, as it were. So there was a time in the mid-18th century especially where the Gael is looked down on by the lowlander. And there's a second aspect to this. Following the Union of 1707, there's a kind of anti-Scottish thing in general that latches on the symbol of the very thin, starved Highland figure as a symbol for Scotland generally. And so the poor old Gael is getting it from two directions, from the lowlanders and also from Britain more widely.
Sin na bhanáin gan nanig tegan a díolacha déadge a bheith crunecha go tá séinse púsí Nancy an na Machlainn a réir an Duanig Burns, the Jolly Beggars.
And basically what's going on there is that a bunch of ne'er-do-wells, the lowest of the low in society, get together to drink, to snog, to play the fiddle, and one by one the various characters step up to tell something of their story. And there's one elderly lady who quite cheerfully tells her story, and that story is that her lover, her husband, John Hielanman, has been hanged. And we get no explanation as to why he's been hanged. It's simply a fact of life. What do you do with a Highlander? You hang them. It's the only language they understand. And Burns, in registering that, is quite subtly saying, here's just the way it is. He doesn't lard it with comment, he just presents the situation. He presents prejudice without commenting on it.
They banished him beyond the sea, but ere the bud was on the tree, adown my cheeks the pearls ran, embracing my John Highland man. But och, they catched him at the last, and bound him in a dungeon fast. My curse upon them every one, they've hanged my broad John Highland man.
Gebit efiach gyfeg yw'ch ymwr yn y riach yn y gael, fa Miss Morig Burns edd Mary Chaimpel a er y gael. Sgrif ag rownd o'r engi, na misg Highland Lassie agos Highland Mary.
Nay gentle dames, though ne'er sae fair, shall ever be my muse's care. Their titles all are empty show. Gie me my Highland Lassie
Hagalior me een skialok Highland Mary, Mary Chaimpel, nachal Cainchoch. Che a Gael fasgert de Noing, Nian Gillespie agus Agnes Chaimpel, agus Chai Gopar on een Shirogar on een Mochlan vai Goparson Gavin Hamilton, Carriage Burns, agus has smönjach kunt de Chanichiri Burns, agus va at de Syrie hasen Fovashoch, agus ha Koloch fo Nisroch Gag Burns a Hain Groat Stoch op Jacob Gergof, Hal Harris gan Hiishoch in een jaar Jamaica Kova ach gaat de Hagersen Vasichi Ghàidhealtachd as jij kan je goed Burns gaat de Syrie gefatrishen.
Mary is from the Highlands, has family in Ghàidhealtachd, dies at Greenock while waiting for Burns to join her so that those two can go abroad to the West Indies, where Burns was probably going to work on the slave plantations. Burns doesn't hear for a couple of weeks that Mary is dead and is badly affected by this, and on the anniversary of her death writes his song Highland Lassie, to which he attaches a note that tells us the story of their meeting, of their attempt to go abroad and her early death. And we've got some Burnsians who say she was just a bit in the side. We've got others who say she was the true love. But certainly what goes on at the very least is that Highland Mary is one of those aspects of Burns's biography that inculcates a love of the Highlands and the Highlander, especially the Highland woman in this case.
Wi' mony a vow and locked embrace, our parting was fu tender, and pledging aft to meet again, we tore ourselves asunder. But oh, fell death's untimely frost that nipped my flowers so early, now greens the sod and calls the clay that wraps my Highland Mary.
Blian na ní bás bheith i chaimpol chud burns ré a Ghàidhealtachd cin Ghàidhealtachd. Sulan is in gúil a fipriú is in níor hua, na chána gynna gróich, gws árain agus féinich rinnechuig, ní roiid anú áte Ghàidhealtachd mar bard náisianta. Chanila anú sin saliad an yng nghael ysgrifa a cha rwyd ceinich cha ro droch farel is na gael dolchwyd bacig sy bydd.
Bána hua na habapa a bheit ahar burns agus a scíra chin cháirstein, scíra farró mór an taichir son na séma sich agus has a gra réir senachis gur cúid de chealach burns a cúid taichris na séma sich. Agus cúideoch has a gra gyntig tachartasan bhío na cheardaich buai Shenar Burns.
Burns himself says that his grandfather had been out in the rebellion, the first Jacobite rebellion of 1715 for the Old Pretender. So Burns feels family pride and he embraces that story and indeed embellishes that story, at least in the sense that for over 10 years he's very busy writing Jacobite poems and Jacobite songs.
Féim sin cainachach lína bheith Burns bio agus nar háisich Burns a scríbach bheith armach nan sémasach bheith na sáscoil in neachtarí na ha can cocach Vietnam rain inniu agus gyderaf sé bhar van armach nan sémasach a goáit an an dúhich Burns héin a seo an an avapa agus mar sin sé rútacin na bhain a bheith bio an an einsin gönne wat dynne haast bio wat een saas aan zijn armach. Waar necht is een ha foddersoch tarinkoch de Burns.
Me ga cwsig yr agor e sémas a chyfan?
Ja, mi kain jok le Burns ha dirich cheetos a meer hort ga. Waar een honi gema fekelwoch gynne vi er chia vri iri anam jori cheetos a mi agus gyderaf jemach a vi fekelwoch. Get er kunart nen sémasach seachat an an dín Burns. Bheit háas tá mis muineach fécamach gynna bhí cracar út a bhain nó bhúdala ach coú bheit uí mhórice ans na sémasich agus thu gain imimeach óranne ha cíise sin gain.
An na neachtarí bethe Burns a scríban húdar Catherine Carswell. Hij gan ymach ag bia ledys y fe gra gydjach Burns ach ddianig a chaifaddi ag y hwy y lia a unarar gw y gael. Gyda na chael cael jarafja i ddisgrifig ha Carswell gan y fiach gyrwag li cholwch.
Ha biach gaintinach ag bard le gaelig a ha ffydwch fasgyd yn yr ar, gan cwol y Burns y gaelig dden a sgi dy hyn.
The Gaelic brin an skid in a carica ro Liam Burns and skid a gajacy than your arnas, achi gajason and Galgalov, Kutjach a had a vasi, he rave Bielarish and Yach Meyerik ek ro Gaelic na carica, Grukanaum Rukig, Robert Burns. Agus Mercinia Haroa hu fatas, Shin, Han Carrick Herald again chiga in Ginjach a Gaelic a Kleinshin and in Ballantra fuse as a Neuevlin jig, as his Kinchach Grushin Kail to the Iskrin. If a chien go porscht in your ar, stoch a airing yo a artichen for an jachagalig a brin fuse an nictivlin and an kinchira and an elenaring, mershin machlachashin your mach menimne. Hanila deriv smunch and gurdachig and gola Burns egalig as a varigich, nyolas na tain shenche and an in your ar, if beal and yiskrin, avashin agus mahola. Is cínte go dúg sin bua even dói as a ro Burns a coiad éad a chaning agus éad na daine bheith a brí.
Rwdaha ceinich, second the galaf Burns na owner a machlain y cwdai'r glaschw yr un hawn bladd Jenny Geddes. Chaya go dwn fdethyn, sŵas tydd Loch Lomond chwn yn arar, nŵr sian gw yn yr yrra agos tarabos Loch Ffeinia. Heila yr un jaraf li.
For a start, the Highland tours are a bit of an indulgence. Burns has got a bit of freedom. He has got a bit of patronage. He's got a bit of money jangling in his pocket from his first flush of poetic success. So he wants a jolly. But the other thing that Burns believes is that Scottish song and Scottish culture needs to be retrieved and reiterated. In many ways, he's an antiquarian. And although he has a good time with friends, drinking and eating and travelling on the tours, he is also self-consciously imbibing the landscape, collecting songs, learning more about the fiddler Niel Gow, for instance, learning more about Scottish history, and indeed he's very careful to seek out certain Jacobite loyal individuals to hear more stories.
Mi swynnych gyrw yw Burns ond gael do Ghàidhealtachd mar a fair son fi mar fard nasianta agus mar a fa ffeiking leid ar ymach na sémasoch agus awm na a fa afaba na dŵ hi nioesym o ddoch ro nych na parliament mar esym thar.
He goes to Edinburgh and then he goes to the Highlands. In other words, he is immersing himself in the big things of Scottish culture, and he is tooling himself up with more stories, more songs about Scottish history, so as to be a national bard, a national poet. The Highlands are absolutely crucial in that mission of Burns to be a national writer.
Gymiostanach had the scrif Burns leor lai the hurus, agus hanyal festrach agakid mugin ach kremaken, ach chuda lichtjeb a sanada, gucharich Rabersteinsley.
I write you this on my tour through a country where savage streams tumble over savage mountains, thinly overspread with savage flocks, which starvingly support its savage inhabitants.
My heart's in the Highlands, my heart is not here. My heart's in the Highlands, a-chasing the deer, a-chasing the wild deer, and following the roe. My heart's in the Highlands, wherever I go. Farewell to the Highlands, farewell to the north, the birthplace of valour, the country of worth. Wherever I wander, wherever I rove, the hills of the Highlands forever I love. My heart's in
Valaun a gúisci gan hár an gúil siopu a
my heart is not here.
There's an aspect of Robert Burns where he likes the outsider, especially the romantic outsider, therefore Bonnie Prince Charlie, therefore the Highland figure generally. It's also the case that he very much is on the moderate side of the Presbyterians against the more hardline Calvinists, and this explains poems like Holy Willie's Prayer. And actually, by assuming sympathy or having sympathy with the Highlander, with the Jacobite, with the Highland landscape, it's deliberately getting up the nose of certain lowland hardline Calvinists.
Siablan na dia can Jaga Burns tall that in your Rannick Dorothy Wordsworth and Balla, Culloden Brahad Uliam, agus Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Had the hill at more than here. We breakfasted at Inveraray and did not set off till 9 o'clock, having, as usual, to complain of the laziness of the servant. Chadach cúsin mór an bear le Burns, seo vegus an thigram again in your ura. Whoe'er he be that sojourns here, I pity much his case, unless he come to wait upon the Lord their God, his grace. There's nothing here but Highland pride and Highland scab and hunger. If Providence has sent me here, 'twas surely in an anger.
He takes a jaunt to Inveraray from Dumbarton, and he gets a bit fed up because the landlord isn't paying enough attention to he and his party, because the landlord is too busy toadying to the Duke of Argyll. And this gets Burns into a rage, so that he writes his famous Inveraray epigram that says, what have we got here? We've got Highland pride, that might or might not be the Duke of Argyll. What else have we got? We've got scarcity, we've got want. And in the background there is Burns's anger over the way in which the Highlands sometimes have been deliberately famined by other people, by other forces, by Britishness, if you like. To some extent, we see Burns's bubble bursting for a second. He loves the Highlands, he wants to love the Highlands, but he gets to Inveraray and he's not well pleased with it because the Highlands is subjugated by men like Argyll, and what he sees is the bad side of the Highlands. He romanticises it elsewhere. Here, he very much sees the underside.
I the lia gachi, Ghaw Burns retuif Loch Lomond. Chod a siach a daintje an a taich mór eie leg dain uasol Ghàidhealtachd, a chan yna gyn sig yn caatje. Wrth a gyda bodden eich lahydd, a hein oran alabanach mar eilen. Fachwtioch gydawsa, agos nod a chan a bon eich a chadl, gant na ferog a gol go eidyn a gydeinje.
Yna fathyn, no fer a ffw, but gaeli yet, siag fa blais mwja ddach fa na sond gylior, chud Burns ei ydyn fddethyn. Ghàidhealtachd mwyn eich ag leim yn cehyd, agos go Burns yn a llawn gynnig a reisdys. Fa ladd ag Jenny Geddes ag yrupl eich yn ydyle, agos dyr anyasyn. He wheeled his horse as if to cross before me to mar my progress, when down came his horse and through his rider's breekless arse and a clipped hedge, and down came Jenny Geddes and my bardship between her and the Highlandman's horse. Jenny Geddes trod over me with such cautious reverence that matters were not so bad as might well have been expected. So I came off with a few cuts and bruises and a thorough resolution to be a pattern of sobriety in the future. Van the Carol Loch the Scochig, Iranik Burns, dyn fddethig, hwg mwynti the fale o'r yn bwrdysga son chwyd bardach, mis the heilig achi y fachlyn.
Van clw ik het hier gefaas, mijn naam zit. Zo'n ounce of leonishin a chai a varstig ik glavolig aan een donation. Agus hoe en hoe was gunje gus teichkrishin aan een donation. Miskne Gurgemoren, miskne Freemasons, agus dunje ik er op boei en oorshin. So maar sin vig ha me kretschken big een clw ik het hier toshachig is skulig big er vig.
By the time Burns is in the Highlands, his fame is spreading, so that, for instance, he's made a freeman of the town of Dumbarton, the gateway to the Highlands, and people do come out to see him. And the other thing that's going on in the Highlands, because by and large we don't have the same hardline Calvinist communities, he's not always liked in Ayrshire or the Lowlands, but in the Highlands there's much more freedom of reception. He genuinely gets a Highland welcome. And it's not just about Highland hospitality. There's an openness to this poet who is recognised as writing scurrilous, satirical verse, and someone who is interested in writing, even at that early stage, about the Highlands.
Va Burns aan de neet en de saloon stel se vleernishin. If je gaan die arake deen van neilschicher spiekige. ach seach fehu fiach yn igig beinirad, chyd e falach yn y Ghàidhealtachd gydist. Fa dúlaige siaciad míle hiúl, ach sanan yn cotse, agos le charid ulam nicol, fer tjekist gladde, giarintinach ach waan ferris vooris krostach. Fala ver chorst kutje die nicol hud burns, a sjen koltach die sjoel, is kulluver geleesde dit de heuf.
Charret me een moor en mis ik oerselen geneet aan erenden je schoitjer. Agus toch krijg je een paartje over heug burns version. Gutje, kan burns of farken, kan een hurige moor aan de neetje kan chies erissen. Agus hij kan je mag als hij het lijnen jenne jaar volgen hasjo. Kan een kutjerie William Nicola ga je er goorst. Hij kutje smal je toch krijg paartje over gewille goorst ga kathakach krijg een dinge shock. Ga er gooi die na haaf, waar beter ga wie gloset. Immer na ga is tussen farro tolik burns of wie voedog sekeli kutjeri oerslen en naatje ergens ach verille kur kafak is.
Chaiad go lúchars glyniuche fer een turkig madi bamrin na halappe, agus go alta vannig fer een drop burns na henne le gul duge.
I fancy to myself that I see my gallant, heroic countrymen coming o'er the hill and down upon the plunderers of their country, the murderers of their fathers, noble revenge and just hate flowing in every vein, striding more and more eagerly as they approach the oppressive, insulting, bloodthirsty foe.
Hul at der kastel riele, van oors een faten en betrooi in a handju, voor de shallige kuch burns.
Yn eich sy'n hyn anna ta change sgrif Burns Peace bardach gyfa cwyd yn neun yn siorysach eith los yn y hwnnegi, le piawn agos gopda I mynydd.
Here Stuarts once in triumph reigned, and laws for Scotland's weal obtained. But now unroofed their palace stands, their sceptre swayed by other hands, fallen indeed unto the earth, whence grovelling reptiles take their birth.
The injured Stuart line is gone, a race outlandish fills their throne, an idiot race to honour lost, who knows them best, despise them most. Brier and Seamasach, Brier and Connartach.
Nu de va burns a canich realtas nun sjorysach, who ga slaikujach ger kieshin in the skivehe.
Ye Irish lords, ye knights and squires, wha represent our bruchs and shires, and doucely manage your affairs in Parliament, to you a simple poet's prayers are humbly sent. Alas, my rampant muse is hearse, your honour's hurts with grief 'twould pierce, to see her sitting on our air slow in the dust, and screeching out prosaic verse, and like to burst. Tell them wha hae the chief direction, Scotland and me's in great affliction, ersin they laid that cursed restriction on aqua vitae, and rouse them up to strong conviction, and move their pity.
It's interesting that if we look at something like Scotch drink, this is the text where Burns invents whisky as the national Scottish drink. Because before that, gin and brandy and wine are at least as much consumed in Scotland as whisky. And he does something very similar in the author's Earnest Cry and Prayer, where he's got a whole bundle of complaints about the underrepresentation of Scotland politically, and where he thinks that the Scottish whisky producers, legal or illegal, are being crushed by harsh excise laws. And this is precisely where he writes that rallying cry, "Whisky and freedom gang together."
Scotland, my old respected mother, though whiles you moistify your leather, till where you sit on craps o' heather, you tine your dam, freedom and whisky gang together. Take off your dram.
Just as he invents haggis as a kind of Scottish national dish, so too he invents whisky as the Scottish national drink. And the point about haggis and whisky is that they're both great things, they're both very tasty, but previously and beyond this point, they're seen as rather primitive things. But Burns is at the forefront of saying these are quality products. In some ways, these are luxury items and they're all that you need. So this is Burns being foundational in the creation of a set of symbols for Scotland. And often what happens in Scotland, we have Robert Burns creating the fiction and then Scotland making it fact.
Chael Burns eith go tua, gwael tashin a fineddon e cryf, mar bedolga rynja dan, do foddonach as y sgide, yw ffimi a fyddwch a uwch gyrhire.
The Highland hills I wandered wide and o'er the lands I had been, but Femi was the broadest lass that ever trod the dewy green.
Y tŵa'r cryf an sy chylglan ffasger ffowlo sinir, go Burns agos a charid Nicol, cwrt chwn ag ddicio sio.
Had rag ar seo yn dwych ag I fard Ghàidhealtachd osian, a cha cwydych ddi rag y fel a tiolwyddi an y neiddi. Se hawn gyda ach siomer awlygu ffo lun ŵr na cloche. Cha I glwysyd nad fa sianol weid I genw rad tron y glawn, ach fa cwtrmach an y sŵlen Burns.
The Ossian poetry in the 1760s is a phenomenon that is controversial, European-wide. James Macpherson claims that he has discovered ancient Gaelic poetry from the 4th or 5th century, perhaps. He translates these poems into English and they become an international bestseller. All kinds of debates about how spurious or not they are. There's some genuine stuff in there, but there's a lot of creative stitching together being done by Macpherson. The point is that the poems of Ossian begin to provide the Highlands to Europe as a place where you can unleash the imagination.
I durf gunje tikshin go mesal se wat dunje Als een geharid Ronjorbeek in Amsterdam, waar reiter hengig en gefrangisch, etaltjes, waar hullen niet kan leven. Agus, ham ik kindje gebig Burns is wel hamische kiri, shoshe clue ha show go heen.
Fa Burns a tardu de gúrum ta goshan, gyda harig shen yn tefsa gyda yn gydawich. Gara calle Jessie duke in a heiltich blan a fichit na betraie. Gan eintjen rasgelach va morach nader se naatjese a chialthi joshan.
Gydig na chael sio ach ffyn Ghàidhealtachd ach gybi de hwg a bwy Burns. Hwrdag yma osian pddwse na bard. Agus hwg a hen lwa mae'r anam iddo chw bysyn anam madych o chwlyn as yn dan ffengel yr aniosian yr ddic y ffasyn. Fa Burns Jonach y fyna fard nasiante chaban y fain iddyn i'r ar.
Gyda fa stocha style Burns ag style ddic y ffasyn i'r ialwyd Gyma i'r ialwyd yn y môr an goian. Ha rwyd yn coloch ons na fad gianw, sy'n fi dod yn sas o'n y siawn tradition ach fi dod yn sas o'n yn doi gyma crwchol agos fa mae gyffersyn y fiaching di cwltar yn iel o chwyd i'r erd mae rwyd yn fa ari i'r baroc spes agos mi smynnych y gro Burns y fiaching ni sy'n y gianw le orain na hafab o cwydroch.
Dech o sylw fach o'r sefaddi, sy'n cael ei dwys y gyro dy lein i'ch ywbrach gyda hosi dyn i gahrwch y gymiachgan idd mae'r efad y cwant ys i Ghàidhealtachd. Ry lein asyn y goledd chwrs ag yswyd y gol ys y nat sys na dyn.
Ha mi smynnych y gynchacus yn bicer o bwyag i'r siors iafau y fawn ag yn awm na geil agus fa bwyag i'r sgrifet ar yn hanig as y i'r Walter Scott, i'r Carolina Oliphant agus i'r Seamus Hogg agus canol chocus mimi yn sy'n gyntwg Burns bwyag mar a fa Ghàidhealtachd gaeching ond yn ochgyf, ond yn neich y fliain tiag agus ha mi caintoch syos chwn y fanyu.
If you get out into the Highlands before Ossian to enjoy it, people would have said, you're mad. After Ossian, people want to consume the Highlands as something recreational. as a positive aesthetic experience. The 18th century is weird for the Highlands, toing and froing between the rest of Britain, including the lowlands of Scotland, despising it and loving it and lionising it.
Het allerasku mag geversen ha shosje een kruhevik mag geversen is een waarstuk ik ocean. Gat burns shin aan zich heel gevoelig in een waarstuk ik aan de kilovernik. Zegt je kerfikje ha de vision aan zich shin. Agus ha gemacht marke big een waarstuk ik ocean. Agus je hiu ik in hier has ik doen. Ik ha daar gewoon ans een waarstuk. So shin rein Burns is shosje kruhevik mag geversen. Had ik me de gatje stijle ietsje. Ach wat de speesje aanse een upper kunde glachkischen. Agus hij torst immer vak kischen. Maar krijg je in vak. Hier dus een nog gevakkeld doen. Een stanje gunje. Maar achtelkelijk een nog ke aan de joor. Agus kapel joor kelijk wel.
Leint Burns am in ta gan ik aan voor, ik kan het toeloch ta. Bloos na shally en alin mijn koerstak, op hiespaardag geschreven.
Admiring nature in her wildest grace, these northern scenes with weary feet I trace. O'er many a winding dale and painful steep, the abodes of covied grouse and timid sheep, my savage journey curious I pursue, till famed Bred Albain opens to my view.
Scríomh Burns siad as an hawn tai sin se ha seo. Díadach seo hain le pansal bhí ád an tealach.
Castell of Yallich vauwyd na gachi ag Ireland vraid alabin. Rhaid Burns udd sonris y giare ddian in Cheerle na Lassie. Han droch spirit de mollig in Ierle sons cho cruai sa haid na Ghàidhealtachd.
They an be damned. What right hae they to meet or sleep or light o' day? Far less to riches, power or freedom, but what your lordship pleased to gie them.
It's not published for over 20 years after Burns's death because it's so hot, it's so controversial politically. And in that text we have Beelzebub, the devil's chief treasurer, saluting the Earl of Breadalbane, because this is based on the true life events where the Earl of Breadalbane had said to the MacDonalds of Glengarry, I don't care if you're starving, I'm not allowing you to emigrate. This is an interesting pre-clearance moment where the Highlander is being kept on the land. And in this text, Beelzebub says, satirically, you're doing a great job, my lords. Let's take it even further. Let's take their brats, their children. Let's make them labour. Let's take their women. Let's turn them into prostitutes in Drury Lane. This is Burns implicitly sympathetic with the Highlander and saying these people are being treated like animals and they should be treated as full human beings. This is a remarkable gesture for a lowland Presbyterian poet, all the more so when most of the MacDonalds of Glengarry are Roman Catholic.
The young dogs, swinge them to the labour, let work and hunger make them sober. The hissies, if they're Auckland's fossont, let them in Drury Lane be lessont. And if the wives and dirty brats come thigging at your doors and yets, flapping with duds and grey wi' bees, frighten away your dukes and geese, get out a horsewhip or a jowler, the longest thong, the fiercest growler, and guard the tattered gypsies' pack, wi' all their bastards on their back.
Ynys gyrwygig na gael a meddygau, coegau ysdi ynigat.
Faith, you and Applecross were right to keep the Highland hounds in sight. I doubt na they would bid nae better than let them ance out o'er the water, then up among the lakes and seas, they'll mak what rules and laws they please. Some daring Hancock or a Franklin may set their Highland blood a rankling. Some Washington again may heed them, or some Montgomery fearless lead them, till God knows what may be effected, when by such heads and hearts directed, poor dunghill sons of dirt and mire may to patrician rights aspire.
Ha mis muintje gefo Burns yn dachwyd y gynw ydd yn neu yn yearle sonogol amach ag hen ach cwdiach ha mis muintje gefo sy'n ffecin magig isio yn neu mi rŵn yn neu yn gael. Wel ha yn danya gra mynd gael peir dunghill sons of dirt and mire may to patrician rex aspire. Agus ha danach in as of your legalta, who of God the first Highland man was made, for him be a nerve petter a clock of tower, gus na gael a chrwchig. Agus mar sin, gyda si dan ydol, dan magi a hasio, mis mwyntin gyfo Burns a chwrg y ffeim rwtyn efain a fa alm ar ha, agus mar sin a magig an y gyddoch yn yearle a cwdiach a chwlter. A fa clacag na efain sio.
Y chilig tŵgwn chalyn Hurl Burns a ddyniledd yn aml Niel Gow na gachu a sy'n ynyfr. Rys fo geirs fa Burns ar ciol fy soren sila môr y fan ga gynnwch Niel Gow pwst ar y Niel.
Hashin Kated, Burns bydys mynach sé barst na halapa ach. Va Burns a chearsch gemissel orange, agus kjol chaninse sa vai is barstach, agus over ille ha mi kindjach a vai chuur sé vi kunjach orange, agus vik saimvorike gana kjol kutjach.
Burns is entranced by the figure of Niel Gow. He's aware of some of the tunes beforehand from other writers, meets with Gow, sees that Gow is an absolute virtuoso in the fiddle. He himself, Burns, can only scratch at the fiddle, but nonetheless what is sparked off is not despair and putting the fiddle away, is the idea, I would like to be able to create tunes, music a bit like this. Not that he writes music, but he selects songs. And Niel Gow is the figure for Burns who finally says to him implicitly, the fiddle, the violin, that is absolutely a top instrument and a top way of doing Scottish music. After you've visited Niel Gow, there's nowhere else to go.
Burns fachlid di cwtchen y ffein ag Niel Gow, jaraf rynadwan hia, fel a molwg ciol na halape, pe byddwch oren pwrs rasbe agos reilichen.
Y tordim yr eir Niel Gow hwyd Burns, gyda dyna bec fan ys colos tabydd, anarach, gaelwch, le loci y lia me fahys ysgyltio. Ei eintynach, sialtyn je hiel is cthi codd.
From Niel Gow and all kinds of people, he is hearing Gaelic and Highland tunes, and also the fact is with Gaelic and other music, a lot of this music is interbred, fiddle tunes, reels, strathbays. But if we think about A Fond Kiss, one of his greatest hits in 1791, one of his greatest love songs, he chooses the tune which is called Rory Dull's Port. And what that is a kind of mispronunciation of the Gaelic, which ought to say more or less or be translated more or less as Blind Roderick's tune. That is the most famous instance of him selecting a Gaelic tune.
Chod Burns ai an nartatua y tyn y sio gw cylich negi, larach car yn rhywyddi. Blar as yn eddi heimysach an y siaciad gia ci her fichyd sy'n neu. Hwyr fiach nhw'n siemysach, le fai cawnt gwyn je, ian greimach cleverhaus ar yn cawn, laf yn nwachgar, har fiach Ghàidhealtachd.
Wat toen Jake en Viach naar rachige walische schokken, rinnichig na gael go tufnen schemisig. Ach, ga je loon cupage sa vlaar, agis sa de gra kunt toch hugela en taxe na klachise. Nisje va burns va hjoldige va nan schemisig ranje. Agis han ik eschne schokke speech en ook gan grimig, njo, maar de wekkese net, morar gaskel gunje.
Hoe them thousa charloch heen a volgig burns.
Rhaina, Jiffer o rhain mi ein yn prawnsa agus ans na heuransin ha foddersioch gyda moddwch chanie va Charloch Stewart va hast bio sy'n naam va Burns bio ach charwa mach yn dynnu boch sy'n ag naam sy'n ach dynnu o cwmasoch dochasoch va ruggochig spirit na Raibeart doch spirit naar de maag agus va route kan aan sin va kortig die Burns agus sin mar ha karuggochig ons na horanjeke.
Soorach op dias va Charloch nu de Burns skryf ik maar een. Ach ik een baard speech voor gaan een Korean geilachje.
There is something of a project with Robert Burns to say we're not talking about the ragged, impoverished, famished Highlander. We are talking about the rather handsome figure who can fight well, but who has now tragically been defeated. And Burns does buy into that romance. He is elegiac. This is sometimes written off as sentimental Jacobitism, but I think that phrase actually is a bit trivial, and Burns sincerely, as a great poet of the Romantic age, is interested in those whom modernity has written out of the picture, and the Highlander would be one of those. And so in a song like Highland Laddie, what we get is the notion of the well-fed but vanquished Highlander. What we get is the sexually potent figure, and of course that spills over into things like Charlie, He's My Darling, which is really quite erotic, which says, I know what you lowland women want. You want a good Highland man.
The bonniest lad that I saw, bonny laddie, Highland laddie, wore a plaid and was fu bra, my bonny Highland laddie. On his head a bonnet blue, bonny laddie, Highland laddie, his royal hair 'twas firm and true, my bonny Highland laddie. The sun a backwards course shall take, bonny laddie, Highland laddie, at och thy manly cottage shake, my bonny Highland laddie. Go for yourself, procure renown, bonny laddie, Highland laddie, and for your lawful king his crown, my bonny Highland laddie, my bonny Highland laddie.
Gag bardach Burns an Emily. Is was skrivi in a faskel goshen ga, fuse meskurslen na duge, hoe da eiach go van a Ghàidhealtachd e kastel vlaad.
Burns took hospitality more or less wherever it was offered. And basically, when he's working towards and working through his second collection, the Edinburgh edition, many of the subscribers are part of the Caledonian Hunt, to which the volume is dedicated. And so when he goes on his tour and subsequently, he's often hobnobbing with people, often aristocratic, sometimes aristocrats with quite radical political views, sometimes with quite reactionary or conservative views. And Burns, being Burns, was a man who liked to converse with all kinds of people, even liked to hang out with his enemies sometimes and hear them so that he could satirise them thereafter in a poem or a song. But his itinerary is one that I will see the Highlands, whatever, I'll take hospitality from wherever I get it.
A lenten et getue ranig Burns had an ish, chun ik a lochnish, kastel urugedan agus es me smootje aan de fire.
Still through the gap the struggling river toils, and still below the horrid cauldron boils.
Chai hanúr san go Culloden, an na seachiad diag daichid sa sia, chai över nan sémasach, leisint a chaimt na gael taichgus an, fasca trífichid bliana, a vúchig larachse, mu yedig hawl.
Ach me nou ma hannig Burns en Tiefse van moran kun je haast biole kine kaskert blaar gelotter. Wel ook real lief in haast aan ossel mu over hun schemasig agus men teichgaar Ghàidhealtachd. Ach le schemasig na Culloden heen agus een daive wekke in het dunje bochke. Gaan je la na enig sepieken te schreef Burns koe son la gelotter.
The lovely lass so Inverness, nae joy nor pleasure can she see, for e'en to morn she cries, alas, and aye the sot tear blinds her ee. Dramossy moor, dramossy day, a waefu day it was to me, for there I lost my father dear, and brethren three. Their winding sheet the bloody clay, their graves are growing green to see, and by them lies the dearest lad that e'er blessed a woman's ee. Now way to thee, thou cruel lord, a bloody man I trow thou be, for mony a heart thou hast made sair, that ne'er did wrang to thine or thee.
It's interesting that Culloden haunts Burns as it does a lot of Lowlanders. And he writes the Highland Widow's Lament in 1796 or thereabouts, in the last year of his life, in the Dumfriesshire years, just about as far away from Culloden as you can get in Scottish terms. And in that text, he imagines a widow who is close to starvation. She comes south, comes to the lowlands, and she's lost her husband, her lover, Donald, on the battlefields. And Burns empathises with his typical promiscuous sympathy with the loser, the Highland woman who's been displaced, who's lost everything for the cause of Charles Edward Stuart. And again, that is mentioned, it isn't particularly analysed, and the poignancy is just left to hang in the air. And a lot of Burns's songs either present to us the beauty of the Highlands, of Highland culture, or they present to us the loss, the poignancy. Those are his two great gears in terms of writing Highland song.
I was the happiest of all the clan. Sere, sere, may I repine, for Donald was the broadest man, and Donald he was mine. Till cheerly Stuart came at last, sae far to set us free. My Donald Searm was wanted then, for Scotland and for me. Their way fu fate, what need I tell? Right to the wrong did yield. My Donald and his country fell upon Culloden field. Och on, oh Donald, oh, och on, och ree. Nae woman in the world wide, so wretched new as me.
Skrif Burns kremekent de lor la, nu wij den darne koers der Ghàidhealtachd.
So seo ach de leor Cathy a chlofuolig ach yn fasgerciad bliana, agus a ha sialting leor la vic Burns, nyr a chai tron Ghàidhealtachd, as a bliana siachtiag, ceirfichid sa siach. Agus ha immerig big eid y laf skrifig ikke, agus yn orsyn rydych yn canner tras skrifig, hwylacal a chwrn clo, agus ik yn jiddig, a hwyle dwliag, mar a fai an y skrifig, y laf skrifig ag Burns, so fytter levig, direct maar een schreef Burns heen, at ze wij goerst.
Tot je maar een beetje verschieden in de
huis. Mr. and Mrs. Grant accompany us to Kildrummy. 2 young ladies, Miss Ross, who sang 2 Gaelic songs, beautiful and lovely. Miss Sophie Brodie, not very beautiful, but most agreeable and amiable. Both of the gentlest, mildest, sweetest creatures on earth. Sin sure se beach go bhíh níon an óg in a Ghàidhealtachd.
Sé clú veice go tá nach pe.
Sin é díadach mes é chláníad.
Rhaid Burns y li go castial gordain an y fachaber, fan yn dŵad a öyach ag diw gordain sa fein. As y sin, hw gamach o bore, agus Stonehaven, fan yn dy hylaidd fer y fwynach a, Seamus Burness, agus faganelig an teolwch sin.
Heel Burns gwytwneidjon le biach mat hadar yn dwych chwnica iddo li. A chan y lichtiodd gyfradd Gilbert hwta sé ffydd gwsgwg smwain y fes y bli tron Ghàidhealtachd. Ha mil land ochis gyr immer cwsbydd bardach a hasgnian.
If you look towards the latter years of his life, when he's in Dumfriesshire, he's writing almost more Jacobite songs than ever. He's looking at the Dumfriesshire landscape, being turned on by this, but his mind is going to the Highlands. His heart is literally in the Highlands. For Burns, the Highlands is an aesthetic repository that he goes back to again and again and again. And very often, when he's writing about a whole range of people, quite often marginalised or underclass people, somewhere at the back of his mind is the figure of the Gael. He's on the side of the underdog, and the underdog par excellence for Robert Burns is the Highlander.
Sé Raibeart bhain Robert Burns agus hasing le forsta noch son im nupper gacha gaing na hórain agus bhartoch raine agus ha mi se uach amans na hórain raine a ceadris a Ghàidhealtachd ceadris na sémasí ha Bartok Seamus so hacking on an Gaelic a gama Ghàidhealtachd a chuk Robert Burns gaing rutikin Ghàidhealtachd a ha mis minich a chast bhain bithe agus bhain cria agus nach a bhaine bunting is an am a gabhah a ha a cumasach a brosnach a chard gaing sa bhainiu.
Charó Gaelic ag Burns agus get a chrinnich a smáintje ar Ghàidhealtachd go gúisc ag bardach fan a dain scríbte an an nalabis is beola. Hug sin ar Gael an gáil sláim.
Robert Burns a labhart na Gaelic smáinich na me go leitide a bhí ann seo plasce.
Nes go behéistes de me scéal gach dunnes mach hu goh géil. Nuair hiris sé van joch go lua is pialach chuchtach ar smáin stad. Har fanéir mes deur a choscus smar chayan waar ag tam go bochgin.